This story takes place in the mountains of northern Japan, deep in the cold misty hills of Hokkaido, where far away from the noise of cities stood a massive school surrounded by endless forests and mountains. Hundreds of students studied there, and because the school was built in such an isolated location, special residential quarters for teachers and their families had been constructed inside the campus itself. Small houses stood lined up beside one another, creating a quiet little neighborhood hidden between the mountains. A man named Hiroshi had recently moved there with his family after receiving a teaching position at the school. A staff quarter had just become vacant because another teacher had suddenly left. People said he had transferred somewhere else for a better job opportunity, though no one really knew the true reason. The offer was too good to refuse: excellent salary, a house provided by the school, and many benefits. So Hiroshi moved there with his wife, his older daughter, and his younger son. They were a happy family, and Hiroshi was especially excited because his children could study in the school for free, as teachers' children received special privileges. Everything felt perfect: a beautiful home, fresh mountain air, a peaceful environment, and a dream life hidden among the hills. Who wouldn't want a life like that? For a while, everything seemed perfect, until something strange happened. The very day Hiroshi moved in, the school principal sent a staff member with an urgent message specifically for him. The man arrived and explained that inside the house there were 2 inner rooms, and above one of them was an attic-like storage space filled with old compartments and drawers where previous residents had kept boxes and belongings. But there was something deeply unsettling about it. The entire place had been sealed shut, not with a normal lock, but with enormous iron chains wrapped around it again and again, almost 15 or 20 times, as if someone had desperately wanted to imprison something inside. Then the staff member looked directly at Hiroshi and said in a serious voice, "The principal specifically asked me to tell you this. No matter what happens, do not open that place. Don't touch it under any circumstances. That area has been left locked for a reason." Hiroshi looked confused and asked, "But this is our house now. Why shouldn't we open it? We can clean it up and use the space to store things." The staff member quickly shook his head and replied, No, that place became filthy a long time ago. There were insects everywhere, dead animals too, lizards and all kinds of things, so they sealed it shut." But honestly, the explanation felt strange. If it was just dirt, then why wrap the entrance with massive chains over and over again? Why put such a huge lock on it, as if someone wanted to make sure nobody could even think of opening it? Still, the man strictly repeated the principal's words. "Leave it closed. Don't touch it. Use the rest of the house however you want." Hiroshi thought there was probably some reason behind it and decided to ignore it. Over the next 2 or 3 days, the family arranged the house and settled in comfortably. Soon Hiroshi officially joined the school, and his first day finally arrived. As he entered the campus and walked into his classroom, something immediately felt strange. He had taken over the position of another teacher, the same one who had left unexpectedly, and the moment he entered, the students stared at him with odd expressions. Their faces carried no excitement, no curiosity, not even basic respect. It felt like they simply didn't want him there. Hiroshi tried to stay positive. He thought maybe the previous teacher had been loved by everyone, and children naturally take time to accept someone new. So he kept trying to interact with them, speaking warmly and attempting to make them comfortable. Slowly, things became somewhat normal, but deep inside, Hiroshi felt something was off. It felt as if the students knew something, as if they were hiding something from him. But he pushed the thought away and focused on work. Meanwhile, back at home, his wife was cleaning the living room when suddenly a loud noise echoed from inside the house. It came from the inner room, from somewhere above it, a heavy sound, like something had fallen. The moment she heard it, she suddenly heard both children screaming, "Mom! Mom! Mom!" Their footsteps rushed toward her in panic. They came running out at full speed, terrified. She quickly grabbed both of them and asked, "What happened? What happened?" The children nervously replied, Nothing happened. We just got scared. Something fell, that's all." But she frowned immediately and said, "Then what did you drop?" That sound was really loud. Without wasting another second, she hurried toward the room to see what had happened inside. As Hiroshi's wife slowly stepped inside the room, she suddenly froze. The bedsheet that had been neatly spread just a little while ago now looked strangely swollen, puffed up from the middle, as if someone was lying underneath it. She couldn't see any body or shape clearly, but the entire sheet was raised unnaturally. Fear instantly crawled through her body, and she slowly took a step backward. Then, as her eyes moved toward the floor, she noticed something even stranger. Ashes scattered around both sides of the bed in a perfect U-shape, as if someone had carefully spread them there. For a moment, her mind completely stopped working. Nothing made sense. Before she could even understand what she was seeing, the bedsheet suddenly moved. Right in front of her eyes, it rose straight upward, slowly, unnaturally, as if an invisible person had grabbed it and stood up beneath it. In a single horrifying moment, the sheet stood upright directly in front of her. She let out a terrifying scream and instantly collapsed unconscious. When she finally opened her eyes again, she found herself resting in Hiroshi's lap. He looked worried and kept asking, "What happened? How did you suddenly faint?" He gave her water while she nervously explained everything. About the strange ashes, the swollen sheet, and how it had suddenly stood up right before her eyes. But Hiroshi looked confused. What ashes? What are you talking about? Everything was normal when I found you. The bedsheet was lying perfectly flat, and there was nothing on the floor. She immediately protested. No, I saw it with my own eyes. I'm not crazy. The children ran out terrified, and then that thing, it stood right in front of me. Hiroshi tried calming her down and said, maybe it's because we are in a new place. You're tired from all the moving and stress. You probably imagined it. You're exhausted and still adjusting. Deep down, even she started wondering if maybe he was right. After all, they had just moved, and now this place was their home. Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe it was only stress. So she decided to rest and let it go. But strangely, no one even asked the children what had actually happened inside that room, what they had dropped, or what scared them enough to come running out in panic. And after that incident, something else began. From that moment until late evening, an unsettling smell started spreading throughout the house. Not just Hiroshi and his wife, even the children noticed it. It was a horrible smell unlike anything they had ever experienced before. A strange mix of burning incense and something rotten, almost like wet animal waste. The two smells blended together into something deeply disturbing, creating an unbearable stench that slowly filled every corner of the house. Somehow, no matter how much they searched, they couldn't figure out where that horrible smell was coming from. The entire family noticed it. Hiroshi walked around the house checking every corner, but found nothing. In the end, they convinced themselves that maybe it was because the house had been locked for a long time and still carried some old odor. Thinking they would deal with it later, they stopped worrying about it. That night, after having dinner, all four of them decided to sleep together in the living room instead of the inner rooms. They turned on the fan, spread their bedding, and slept side by side. Directly in front of where they were sleeping was a balcony with a large glass door clearly visible from their spot. Everything was quiet. Deep in the mountains, the nights felt even darker and more silent than usual. Then sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning, Hiroshi suddenly woke up feeling thirsty. Half asleep, he drank some water and randomly glanced toward his left and instantly froze. Right in the middle of the balcony sat a chair, and on that chair, a woman was sitting. She had extremely long black hair, and she was slowly brushing it while softly humming a tune to herself. Hiroshi couldn't hear the song clearly. It was only a faint sound carried by the night air, a low, unsettling hum. She just kept brushing her hair, humming, brushing, humming. For a few seconds, Hiroshi simply stared. Then he rubbed his eyes and looked again. Who is that? This is our house. Who is sitting there? He immediately looked to his right. His wife was sleeping beside him. His children were also there. Everyone was asleep. Slowly, he turned back toward the balcony, and she was still there. The woman wore a completely black kimono and her face remained hidden beneath her hair. He tried to see her face, but the darkness made it impossible, and the strands of hair covered everything. Feeling uneasy, Hiroshi nervously called out, "Who are you? Did someone enter by mistake?" The moment he spoke, her hands suddenly stopped moving, complete silence. Then a strange sound came from the balcony. A disturbing, unnatural sound that immediately sent chills through his body. Hiroshi quickly reached to wake his wife, but before he could touch her, the woman slowly turned her head toward him, and what he saw made his blood freeze. The entire right side of her face was torn apart. One eye was split open and hanging outside the socket, dangling horribly against her cheek. Even in the darkness, he could see it clearly. The eye simply hung there, staring directly at him. Hiroshi wanted to scream, wanted to shout, but before even half a second passed, before he could make a sound, the woman suddenly lunged toward him. Using both hands and feet, she crawled across the ground at an impossible speed, rushing toward him like a wild animal. Hiroshi instantly shut his eyes in absolute terror, and when he finally gathered the courage to open them again, there was nothing there. The balcony was empty, completely empty. Hiroshi immediately looked around in panic. Nothing. The balcony was completely empty. The woman had vanished without a trace. His heart pounded violently as he tried to understand what had just happened. Was I dreaming? He thought. But if it was a dream, then why am I fully awake? Confused and terrified, he slowly turned to his right, and the moment he did, his entire body froze. His daughter was sitting upright beside him. Her long hair had fallen over her face, covering most of it, and she was moving her neck violently from side to side with sudden jerking motions while making that same strange sound. Then she stopped and softly began humming. Hiroshi's blood turned cold. It was the exact same tune, the exact same humming the woman on the balcony had been making. Same rhythm, same tone, same unsettling melody. His daughter had never behaved like this before. Never. He stared at her in disbelief and nervously asked, "Sweetie, what happened? Why are you awake?" But she gave no reply. She simply kept humming while slowly swaying her head. Hiroshi didn't wake his wife immediately. Instead, he quietly stood up and moved toward the switch to turn on the light. But the instant he reached for it, his daughter suddenly lunged at him. In a horrifying second, she jumped onto him and violently scratched across his face with terrifying force. Hiroshi cried out in pain and somehow managed to hit the switch. The room flooded with light, and instantly she dropped to the floor with a loud thud. Her hair covered her face as she lay motionless, and then Hiroshi saw something that made his stomach twist. Blood was slowly flowing from her eyes. She had collapsed unconscious. Panicking, Hiroshi immediately woke his wife. She and his son both woke up from the chaos. Somehow they cleaned the blood and rushed her to the nearest hospital in town. After several examinations and treatment, the doctors finally said there was nothing serious. They explained that she had probably spent too much time playing outside and her body had reacted badly from exhaustion or heat. That's all, they said. Nothing to worry about. Hiroshi nodded, but deep inside he couldn't accept it. His wife believed their daughter was simply unwell and would recover soon. His son knew nothing either. But Hiroshi couldn't erase the image from his mind. The woman on the balcony, that torn eye hanging from her face, and now his daughter humming the same melody. He remembered what his wife had seen too, the strange bedsheet, the ashes, everything. A dark possibility had begun growing inside his mind, but he said nothing. He didn't tell his wife because he knew she would panic even more. So he kept quiet and tried to ignore it. The next day he took leave from work and stayed home. Slowly things returned to normal. His daughter recovered physically, and on the outside everything seemed fine. But something about her had changed. Before this, she had always been cheerful, always laughing, playing, and running around with her father. But now, she had become strangely quiet, too quiet. After that day, his daughter barely spoke at all. Whenever anyone asked her something, she simply stayed silent and stared blankly. Hiroshi kept convincing himself that maybe she was still in shock after everything that happened. She had fainted, suddenly fallen ill, and perhaps her mind just needed time to recover. Children act strangely sometimes, he thought. But unlike everyone else, Hiroshi watched her carefully. Maybe because, deep down, he already feared something was wrong. That night, during dinner, everyone sat together eating normally. Hiroshi, his wife, and his son continued talking while eating, but suddenly his eyes fell on his daughter, and he froze. She was eating rice with both hands in an oddly strange way, almost like an elderly person with old habits eating in a traditional style. It wasn't simply eating with hands. There was something unsettling about it. The movements looked too practiced, too natural, like someone much older was controlling her body. Until now, she had only ever eaten with a spoon. She was still a small child, yet now she sat there eating with both hands perfectly, not dropping a single grain. And she kept eating, and eating, until she finished an amount of food no child her age should have been able to eat. Even Hiroshi's wife looked shocked. "Since when did she start eating like that?" she whispered. But somehow they ignored it again, convincing themselves she was simply very hungry after being sick. Night came, and everyone eventually went to sleep. Their staff quarters stood directly opposite the school building, which could easily be seen from the balcony. Then suddenly, at almost the exact same time Hiroshi had awakened 2 nights before, his eyes opened again. Tun 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 tun. A bell echoed through the cold mountain night. The sound seemed distant, but clear enough to cut through the silence. Hiroshi slowly sat up. He recognized that sound immediately. It was the school's old hand-rung bell, the one used to announce breaks and the end of classes. Tun, tun, tun. Someone was ringing it. Confused, Hiroshi walked onto the balcony and stared toward the school building. And there, on the first floor at the far right corner where the bell was installed, someone was ringing it repeatedly. Hiroshi frowned. Who in the world rings a school bell at 3 in the morning? It made no sense. He woke his wife and whispered, "Someone's ringing the school bell." Half asleep, she replied, "At this hour? Who would be there? Maybe some students are fooling around." But Hiroshi immediately shook his head. This wasn't a city. The school stood isolated between mountains and forests. Who would come there at 3 a.m. just to play a prank? What felt even stranger was that all the other teacher quarters stood nearby, yet not a single light had turned on. Nobody else had woken up, only Hiroshi. He stared toward the school and finally muttered, "Forget waking everyone. I'll go check myself." Annoyed and curious, he quietly got up, changed his clothes, and prepared to walk outside into the cold darkness, determined to find out who or what was ringing that bell in the middle of the night. Hiroshi stepped out and slowly made his way toward the school. As he got closer, the sound continued echoing through the silent mountains. Tun, tun, tun. The bell was still ringing non-stop. The entire area felt unnaturally quiet. The silence was so deep that even beneath the constant ringing, Hiroshi could clearly hear the sound of his own footsteps. Holding his phone with the flashlight on, he climbed the first set of stairs, then another, slowly making his way toward the first floor corridor. Step by step, he walked deeper into the darkness. The school felt completely different at night. Cold, empty, dead. As he reached the top, he looked toward the far right side of the corridor where the bell hung. The hallway stretched endlessly ahead of him. The bell stood at the very end, while the staircase sat in the center between the left and right wings of the building. Hiroshi slowly turned right and aimed his flashlight toward it. At first, through the weak light, he thought maybe someone was standing there. But when he looked carefully, his entire body went numb. There was no one there, no one at all. The bell was hanging in the air by itself, swinging back and forth violently. Tun, tun, tun. Its metal striker kept hitting the plate as if invisible hands were wringing it. Hiroshi blinked several times, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. His mind completely froze. How was this even possible? Fear slowly crawled into his chest because everything happening over the past few days suddenly connected inside his head. His wife seeing that thing, the strange smell, the woman on the balcony, his daughter's behavior. Could all of this be connected? Before he could think further, something suddenly moved through the beam of his flashlight. Swoosh! A dark shadow shot across his light at unbelievable speed and vanished to the left side of the corridor. Hiroshi instantly turned his phone toward it, and the moment the flashlight reached the corner, his heart nearly stopped. Pressed tightly against the far wall stood a person, but something felt horribly wrong. The figure stood in an unnatural position, almost upside down, body twisted in a way no human should be able to stand. Hiroshi couldn't understand what he was looking at. His mind simply refused to process it. But before he could react, he suddenly heard footsteps from below, someone rapidly running up the stairs toward him. He immediately turned around. Who is that? Who's there? And then he saw her. Running toward him through the darkness was his own daughter. Amy? Hiroshi shouted in shock. Sweetie, what are you doing here? Why did you come? But Amy kept running toward him with a strange smile on her face. She rushed past him without stopping and continued sprinting straight toward the figure standing in the left corner. Hiroshi instantly panicked and ran after her. Amy, stop! Don't go there! Amy. He chased her down the corridor as she continued running farther and farther ahead. Hiroshi screamed desperately. Emi, stop, sweetie, it's me. I'm your father. Emi. But the voice that came from her mouth no longer sounded like his daughter. It had become twisted, cold, and deeply evil. The figure stood directly in front of Hiroshi, staring at him with its torn face and horrifying smile. Then, in a cold voice, it whispered, Come here. Hiroshi shut his eyes tightly. His heart was pounding so hard it felt ready to burst. Do or die, he thought. I have to get out of here somehow. I just need to escape this place first. Once I get outside, I'll think later. But I have to survive. He knew if he could reach the ground floor and run straight ahead, his house would be there. Holding Emi tightly, he ran with his eyes half closed, not even caring what stood before him anymore. Then suddenly, while rushing downstairs, he remembered something. The small prayer room inside the school dedicated to the school shrine goddess. Students and teachers often offered prayers there during ceremonies. The room was on the right side near the ground floor hallway. Hiroshi immediately changed direction and ran toward it. The horrifying figure still stood ahead of him, but Hiroshi turned sharply and charged toward the room without even knowing whether the door was locked or open. And by pure chance, or perhaps by divine mercy, the door was open. Hiroshi burst inside, switched on the lights, and instantly started praying loudly, screaming with tears in his eyes. The moment he did, something terrifying happened. The horrifying screams and sounds chasing him from behind suddenly stopped. Completely. Total silence. Emi instantly collapsed unconscious from his arms and hit the floor. Hiroshi stood there, shaking uncontrollably. Through the windows, he could see his house standing in the distance. But fear had rooted his feet to the ground. He stayed there for nearly 15 minutes, trying to gather the courage to move. But then another horrifying thought struck him. My wife? Kenta. They're alone at home. Panic instantly returned. Without wasting another second, Hiroshi picked up Amy, whispered prayers under his breath, and ran out. He sprinted as fast as his body allowed. As he ran through the school grounds, loud bell sounds suddenly exploded from everywhere around him. Tun 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 tun. It echoed from the first floor, then the second, then the third. Bells rang wildly from every direction, shaking the entire school, and mixed within those sounds, voices echoed through the darkness. You'll come too, she'll come too, all of you will come. Hiroshi kept running, faster, faster. He finally reached his house and burst through the door. Then his entire world stopped. On the floor in front of him lay his wife and little Kenta. Their bodies were lying in strange positions, completely motionless. Hiroshi immediately placed Emi down and rushed toward them. He grabbed his wife's hand, ice cold. He shook Kenta desperately. Kenta, wake up, son, wake up. But the moment his hands touched his son's face, his body turned numb. His head, his hands, his skin, all of it felt freezing cold. Terrifying realization slowly entered Hiroshi's mind. It felt as if both of them were no longer part of this world anymore. And standing there in complete shock, Hiroshi couldn't understand what he was supposed to do anymore. Hiroshi immediately dropped to his knees and checked his wife's breathing with trembling hands. She was still breathing. Then he checked Kenta's pulse, and thank God, his pulse was there too. They were alive. Relief hit him so hard he almost collapsed. Without wasting a second, he quickly lifted them and rushed outside. Running from house to house, he began banging on doors and screaming desperately. Help! Somebody help! Please come quickly! He knocked so hard it felt like he would break the doors down. Within moments, neighbors began waking up. One teacher came out, then another, and soon several families gathered around. They saw Hiroshi covered in scratches and injuries while his wife and children lay unconscious with ice-cold bodies. Hiroshi was shaking uncontrollably. He tried explaining as much as he could between breaths. Something terrible happened. I'll explain everything later. Please, we have to save them first. Nobody wasted time asking questions. They immediately carried everyone into vehicles and rushed toward the hospital through the dark mountain roads. But something strange happened during the drive. One of the neighbors looked at Hiroshi and asked, "Wait, you said the school bell was ringing? And all of this happened at school?" Hiroshi quickly nodded. The man stared at him in confusion. "But none of us heard anything." Hiroshi looked up. "What?" Another teacher replied. "No bell. No noises, nothing at all." Hiroshi froze. The school stood surrounded by teachers' quarters. If bells had really rung that loudly from all 3 floors, everyone should have heard them. But nobody had. Apparently only Hiroshi and his family had experienced it. They first reached a nearby clinic, then later shifted them to a larger hospital where doctors worked through the night. Thankfully, both Kenta and Hiroshi's wife were saved. Later that night, while everyone sat exhausted outside the hospital, Hiroshi finally explained everything. The attic, the strange smell, the woman on the balcony, Emi's behavior, the school bell. All of it. The neighbors sat silently while listening. Then one of them exchanged nervous glances with the others before speaking. "We don't know if anyone told you this," he said quietly. "Actually, before you moved into that house, another family used to live there." Hiroshi looked up. "Family?" The man slowly nodded. "The teacher who lived there before you. His entire family died in a car accident." Hiroshi's face instantly turned pale. Nobody had ever told him this. Not the principal, not the school staff, no one. But then came something even worse. One neighbor lowered his voice and whispered, "People say it might not have been an accident." Hiroshi immediately stood up. "What? What do you mean? Who would kill an entire family? Why?" The teachers looked around nervously before answering. "We don't know if it's true. Maybe it's only rumors. Maybe not. We never talk about these things because we work there too, and we don't want trouble." Silence filled the room for a moment. Then one of them quietly said something that sent a chill through Hiroshi's entire body. "But some teachers secretly believe the principal may have been involved. Why, how? Nobody knew. And perhaps nobody wanted to know." The neighbors explained that nobody knew for sure. It was only a rumor, a theory whispered quietly among some teachers. The previous teacher and the principal had been extremely close. Not only that, even the principal's wife considered him like a brother, which made the whole thing even more confusing. If they were that close, then why would anything happen between them? Why would anyone harm an entire family? Nobody had answers, nobody even wanted to ask. At that point, Hiroshi's mind had completely stopped processing anything else. He didn't care about rumors, theories, or hidden secrets anymore. He only wanted his family to survive. That was all that mattered. By morning, when his wife and children finally regained consciousness, Hiroshi made his decision immediately. Without returning to work, without informing anyone, he arranged trucks, packed everything, and moved out that very same day. He left behind the house, the school, the staff quarters, and those cold mountain hills of Hokkaido forever. The place that had almost taken everything from him. Emi slowly recovered too. Even after waking up, she wasn't normal at first. She remained quiet and frightened. But over time she gradually improved. Still, every member of the family carried fear inside them. They all knew something terrible had happened, but strangely none of them talked about it. Kenta was still very young and barely understood anything. Emi seemed trapped in her own thoughts. She knew something horrible had happened to her, but couldn't remember what. Hiroshi's wife had lost consciousness before everything escalated, so the truth of that night lived mostly inside Hiroshi's mind alone, and he chose not to tell anyone. He didn't want to push his family into even deeper fear. Surprisingly, nobody even asked him why they suddenly abandoned such a good job or why they had left overnight. Perhaps they understood there were things better left unsaid. They eventually returned to their hometown and somehow tried moving on. But that night, Hiroshi could barely sleep. Even after returning, his mind refused to rest. Hours passed before exhaustion finally dragged him into sleep, and then he saw a dream. No, it felt more like a memory, like watching scenes from a film. Suddenly, Hiroshi saw the locked room inside their old house. The same attic storage area wrapped with chains and secured with giant locks. The image played before his eyes. Then he saw both children running into the room. Curious, they stared up toward the chained attic entrance. They looked at the huge locks and chains hanging there and started playing with them, hanging from the chains, pulling at them, laughing. And then suddenly, Emi's hand accidentally grabbed the lock. Crash! The old lock snapped and fell heavily onto the floor. The children instantly froze. Then curiosity took over. "The lock broke," Emi excitedly said. "Let's see what's inside." She turned to Kenta, and the two immediately dragged a chair over. They placed it on top of the bed, climbed up, pulled away the heavy chains one by one, and slowly opened the attic. As Kenta slowly opened the attic drawer, something suddenly crashed out and fell directly toward them. Thud! It landed heavily on the bed below. It was a strange golden urn, wrapped tightly with a deep red cloth, tied with thick sacred threads and old bindings, as if some ritual had been performed around it. The moment it hit the bed, a metallic sound echoed through the room. Tun, tun, tun. Both children instantly panicked. Terrified, they jumped down. Emi quickly grabbed the urn and hid it under a nearby table before both children ran outside in fear toward their mother, screaming that something had fallen. And suddenly Hiroshi realized He was seeing everything from outside, like a spectator watching a memory unfold. He saw his wife entering the room exactly as she had described that day. He watched her stop near the bed. He watched the bedsheet slowly swell upward as if someone invisible lay underneath it. He saw her eyes lower toward the floor where ashes formed that strange U-shaped pattern around. And then saw it. Right before her eyes, the bedsheet rose and stood upright by itself. The exact same thing she had described. The exact same thing Hiroshi had dismissed as stress and hallucination. Hiroshi suddenly jolted awake, covered in sweat. He sat there breathing heavily, immediately drinking water while trying to process everything. It had all been real, every single thing. The children had opened that attic. The lock had broken. Something had been released. But strangely, mixed with fear, Hiroshi also felt relief. At least now he knew he hadn't gone insane. At least now he finally understood where it all started. Feeling unsettled, he quietly walked over and slept beside his wife and children. But the moment he fell asleep again, another dream began. And unlike normal dreams, this one felt different. Usually dreams fade after waking up. But this felt intentional, as if something itself wanted Hiroshi to see it, wanted him to remember, wanted to show him the truth. The second dream began, and Hiroshi saw the family that had lived in that house before them. They looked almost exactly like his own family. A happy couple, one daughter, one son, smiling and laughing together. They had lived there for 10 or 12 years and had built a peaceful life. A normal, loving family, just like Hiroshi's. Then suddenly the scene changed. They were driving somewhere together along a highway through the mountains. And then crash! A truck slammed directly into their car. Hiroshi watched the horrifying accident unfold right before his eyes. Then he saw the funerals, all 4 bodies, their final journey. There was nobody around them, no grandparents, no relatives. No one came because they had no family left. And then the dream suddenly changed again. Hiroshi saw the principal. He was standing beside the truck driver, speaking calmly, smiling. "Good job," he said. "You handled it perfectly. Now disappear for a while. Go underground. Don't worry. I'll protect you." Hiroshi froze. The principal was an extremely wealthy man. Powerful, influential, someone untouchable. In the dream, Hiroshi watched him hand over money to the driver. Large amounts. Everything had already been arranged. Everything had been planned. Everything had been sorted from the beginning. Then the dream showed Hiroshi something even more horrifying. The previous teacher who had lived there was named Tatsuya, and Hiroshi saw that Tatsuya shared a brother-sister bond with the principal's wife. For nearly 10 or 12 years, he had considered her family. But one day, Tatsuya discovered something he was never supposed to know. The principal was secretly having an affair with another teacher from the same school. Tatsuya became furious. In the dream, Hiroshi saw him confronting the principal directly. "Tomorrow, I'm telling your wife everything," he shouted. "How could you do this to my sister?" He threatened him repeatedly and truly intended to expose him the very next day. But that next day never came. Because on the day Tatsuya went out with his family, the principal made his move. The accident had been planned. The truck had been arranged. Their deaths had been arranged. Everything. Hiroshi watched it unfold like scenes from a movie. Then the dream shifted once again. After the murders, the principal became terrified, not because of guilt, but because of fear. Fear that the dead would return. Fear that their spirits would haunt him. Hiroshi saw the principal secretly visiting a powerful spiritual master deep in the mountains. The principal sat there nervously and begged, "Please help me. I don't want them haunting me. I'll change. I'll stop all my bad habits. Just tell me what to do." After long silence, the old man finally replied, "What happened has happened. Their family has no relatives, no one left behind. Gather the ashes of all 4. Place them together inside a ceremonial urn. Wrap it tightly and seal it. Then hide it in the same house where they once lived. Bind it from all sides so the spirits remain trapped there forever and can never escape." And suddenly everything made sense. The chains, the locks, the attic, the principal's strange warning. He never cared about dirt, insects, or dead animals. That was a lie. He had specifically sent someone to warn Hiroshi because he knew exactly what was hidden up there. He knew what would happen if those chains were removed. That was why the attic had been wrapped in massive chains and secured with giant locks. But somehow, destiny had other plans. Hiroshi still couldn't understand how children could accidentally break such a huge lock so easily. But they did, and the moment it opened, everything fell apart. The trapped spirits were finally released, and the first people they targeted were the new family living inside their home. They tried taking Emi because, blinded by rage, the spirits couldn't distinguish enemies from innocent people. To them, anyone living in their house had become part of the hatred. Hiroshi watched the dream continue as rituals and chants sealed the urn away and chains locked it forever. Then suddenly his eyes snapped open. Morning sunlight filled the room. It was already 7 o'clock. Hiroshi sat there drenched in sweat once again and quickly drank water while trying to breathe normally. Then he picked up his phone, and his face slowly changed. 35 missed calls. Calls from teachers, calls from neighbors, calls from the same people who had helped him at the hospital. Every single call had come during the night. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Hiroshi's hands immediately began shaking. He quickly called back one of the neighbors and said, "Hello, I reached safely. Is everything okay?" Why did everyone call me so many times? For a few seconds, the person on the other side remained silent. Then he slowly replied, "You all are safe, that's good. But, do you know what happened here?" Hiroshi frowned. The man's voice grew uneasy. "Nobody understands how or why. But the principal is dead." Hiroshi froze. The neighbor continued, "Last night, on the top floor of the school building, inside one of the classrooms, the principal was found hanging." Silence filled the call. According to everyone else, it was a suicide, a shocking tragedy, something nobody could explain. But Hiroshi sat there staring blankly ahead, his face slowly turning pale. Because unlike everyone else, he knew. Deep down, Hiroshi already knew exactly who had killed him.